They hooked my $300,000 RV at sunrise. No warning, no hearing, while the HOA president in a hot pink power suit smirked from my driveway. That coach wasn't a toy. It held medical gear for tomorrow's veteran clinic. If it spoils, families lose care and I lose my job. The signatures authorizing the tow, one belongs to a neighbor who died last year. The board calls it policy. I call it theft, public, humiliating, calculated. I've got 24 hours to turn the law into a weapon and expose the kickbacks hiding behind their smiles. Stay to the end to see how the Marines legally flipped the script and why her mansion wasn't safe. Before we start, tell me where you're watching from in the comments. Chains scraped pavement like metal teeth. A diesel cough punched the quiet. I hit the porch barefoot, heart hammering, and there it was, my $300,000 classic coach tilted on a flatbed, nose down like a captured whale. No warning, no hearing. Just a tow order waved like a trophy. The HOA president stood by the curb, arms folded, face carved out of ice. Non-compliant vehicle, she said. The driver wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the asphalt, flicked a glance at a clipboard with a signature that wasn't mine. The scanner beeped wrong on the VIN. He hit it again, longer beep, he swallowed. My coach wasn't a toy. It was my second home, my work truck, my mission kit. Inside that shell, medical coolers, a portable ECG, supplies for tomorrow's veteran clinic, 24 appointments, spouses and kids included. If those coolers warmed, meds died. If meds died, promises died with them. I stepped closer to the bed. The winch whined, steel groaned. I tasted metal in my mouth. Step back, the tow guy muttered. He was sweating in the morning cold. You're trespassing on your own driveway, the president said, lips barely moving, papers flashed. I read the bold line, seizure, not tow, not temporary. They weren't storing my property. They were taking it. Who authorized this? I asked. Board vote, she said. Last night. I scanned the page. I knew two names. One was a man who died last year. The ink looked photocopied. The date stamp was wrong by a week. My breath tightened, but not from panic, from protocol. I counted cameras, ring doorbells waking up, curtains twitching, neighbors half-dressed on sidewalks. Shame is a predator, it feeds in public. You're making a legal mistake, I said. She smiled like I'd complimented her shoes. The tow truck shifted, the flatbed angled, my coach tilted higher. I pictured the coolers inside, lids sealed, thermometer blinking. There was a folding cot for a Marine with a bad back, a woman with post-surgical nerve pain, a kid who needed an inhaler. The clinic wasn't a hobby. It was a lifeline we ran on weekends because the system takes weeks and pain doesn't. Call the police, I told myself. I knew what they'd say, civil matter. I took out my phone anyway and recorded. I shot the plate, the VIN, the driver's badge, his eyes. Say your name, I said. He shook his head. The winch ratcheted. The president handed me a violation notice stabbed onto one of those little wire stands you use for garage sales. It trembled in the breeze like a white flag upside down. I put my palm on the coach. Warm, alive. This is medical equipment, I said, loud enough for the sidewalk jury. Spoilage is harm, interference is harm. She didn't blink. You had options, she said. You chose noncompliance. The flatbed locked. The driver climbed in the cab like a man going to his own sentencing. I stepped back, measured the field. I wasn't going to grab steel and make a scene. I don't wrestle trucks, I wrestle timelines. I looked at my watch and started the count, 24 hours, not until I lost everything, until I took it back. I dialed 3 numbers as the truck rolled. My attorney, county records, and a Marine brother who answers on the first ring. They touched the wrong asset, I told him, and they forged to do it. He asked one question. You ready to go lawful? I watched that coach disappear around the bend, the morning light catching the windows like they were eyes. I'm already gone, I said. Then I went inside, sat at the kitchen island, opened a folder labeled Battle Civil, and started building a war made of paper. The clubhouse smelled like old carpet and cheap coffee. Fluorescents buzzed, chairs waited in rows like a jury. I walked straight to the folding table where the board perched. No small talk, no smile. A stack of folders sat at the president's elbow, tabbed in bright colors like a trap disguised as a rainbow. We have an agenda, she said. Great, I said. Start with legality. She slid a folder across the table, retroactive fines. A temporary impound authorization signed by neighbors who wouldn't sign if you lit their lawns on fire. I read the names. One belonged to a dead man. The time stamp was midnight. The board requires 48 hours notice for any vote. I lifted my phone and photographed every page, edges, staples, shadows like a crime scene tech. The treasurer shifted, eyes flicking to the door. Guilt goes for exits. You can appeal, the president said. In writing, we'll consider it next month. Next month, after the clinic died, after the meds spoiled, after my reputation with families I promised to serve went underwater. Due process, I said. You skipped it, she tilted her head. No one forced you to park a commercial eyesore in view. The word eyesore cracked something in me, then hardened it all over again. Behind her, a corkboard held our bylaws, photocopy gray. No state amendment stamp. I took a picture of that too. You never recorded last year's changes, I said, so you're enforcing rules you don't legally have. The room shifted. It wasn't much, a cough, a foot scrape. Small doubts widening like hairline cracks in glass. She went still. This meeting is adjourned, she said, though it hadn't actually begun. I stepped back, drawing air not to calm down but to calculate. I needed a replevin writ. I needed DMV enforcement on the towing violations. I needed ADA disruption documented for the clinic supplies. I needed a criminal complaint packet that could walk into the Attorney General's office and sit down before anyone could stand up. I texted Alvarez, Marine turned JAG. He wrote back in seconds, stack statutes, bring dates, bring pictures, bring the chain from vote to tow hook. When I walked out, sun stabbed my eyes and the parking lot wobbled with heat. My phone buzzed, county records sent a curt reply, no tow record on file. Perfect. Unregistered storage yard, off the books impound. I followed the tow truck plate number I captured to a chain link yard behind a shuttered muffler shop. Rusted sign, faded letters, Caldwell Recovery, the treasurer's last name. Of course, I filmed the fence, filmed the missing posted rates, filmed the wrong notice hanging crooked on a rain-warped board. Then I focused through the diamonds of chain link and found my coach. Tarped, tilted, the coolers inside were on a clock I couldn't see. I called the after-hours number, nothing. I called the sheriff, civil matter. I called DMV enforcement, read the statute like a man reciting scripture. We'll open a case, they said. Case number pinged my inbox like a bullet hitting steel. Floodlight snapped on. The president's voice floated from the dark. Trespass is a second violation, she said. Say it again, I replied, raising my phone. Her shadow cut across the gravel. You're not getting that eyesore back, she said. I felt my heartbeat in my teeth. I don't need threats, I said. I need a judge. Then I turned, walked into the night, and made the calls that turned paper into orders and orders into action. The 24-hour pack-and-ship stayed open for notaries and desperation. I spread documents under humming lights while the clerk watched me like I was building a bomb. I was legal, timed, and aimed. Alvarez stayed on the phone, voice steady, cadence like a fire team leader sweeping a room. State towing statute, section 14, post rates, provide access, file impound notice within 2 hours, he said. They failed all three. Add ADA interference for the medical equipment. Add deceptive trade practices for the forged vote. Add UCC. UCC, the clerk repeated like she was overhearing Latin. I pulled my file. Last year, when I launched the clinic program through my LLC, we filed a UCC-1 financing statement naming the RV as collateral to protect the operational asset. A paper shield that looks like nothing until someone swings at it. Interfere with collateral, Alvarez said, and you're not just in HOA land, you're in commercial law. Judges respect paper. I wrote the affidavit like I write after-action reports. Short sentences, dates, pictures, no adjectives unless they were evidence, signature traced, stamp missing, neighbor deceased. The clerk's stamp hit paper with a wet clunk. I slid everything into a manila envelope that felt like a weapon. Then I drove to night court, empty halls echoing under my boots, the vending machine humming like it knew secrets. The judge read fast. She circled a line. Medical supplies for veterans, she asked, face going still. I nodded. Temperature sensitive, I said, evidence of spoilage accruing hourly. She signed the temporary order, replevin. Sheriff civil standby, immediate return to prevent irreparable harm. If they resist, she added, record it. If they destroy documents, we'll address sanctions. I walked out with the writ like I'd been handed oxygen. In the parking lot, I called DMV enforcement again, reported the unposted rates and the off-the-books address. Case updated. I called the AG intake line. Email sent with exhibits. Receipt number hit my phone. Then Alvarez texted, check architectural committee forms, page 9. I opened the PDF he'd pulled from public records, 3 signatures approving the RV restrictions, 2 duplicated, 1 traced. The third had a wobble where a pen paused to copy a stroke. Forgery isn't artistry, it's impatience. I filed it into the criminal packet. I added the treasurer's surname to the towing company registration. I highlighted a bank transfer labeled landscape overflow that matched storage fee numbers down to the penny. Kickbacks like breadcrumbs. I drew a line from HOA dues to a private LLC with the president's maiden name. Thin rope, pull hard enough and a house moves. At red lights, I watched the time tick. The coolers were a countdown in my head. I pictured a Marine I promised to see tomorrow, the way he holds pain in his jaw until it trembles. I pushed faster without speeding. Discipline isn't slow, it's precise. I got home before midnight and printed 3 more sets, 1 for the sheriff, 1 for the yard, 1 for the bond carrier. I would wake at 7 a.m. because if fraud touches dues, a fidelity bond starts breathing like a dragon. I stood in the kitchen, hands flat on the island. The house was quiet. The neighborhood slept under rules it trusted someone else to honor. I whispered to the room like a vow. Law over chaos, strategy over rage. Then I set alarms. 5:30 coffee, 6 o'clock sheriff, 6:30 roll, morning would be loud, we arrived at first light. Sheriff's cruiser washed the chain link in blue. My Marines pulled up behind me, licensed recovery operators now, not a gang of friends. Body cams on, checklists clipped. Alvarez stepped out with the writ in a clear sleeve like a priest with scripture. The manager met us at the gate, keys jangling, eyes small. Closed, he said. The deputy unfolded the order, read it steady. Immediate return to prevent irreparable harm, he said. Open the gate. The motor groaned, the fence slid. Gravel crunched under our boots. My coach crouched in the corner, tarp sagging, a thin ribbon of condensation shining under the morning light. We photographed everything. Odometer, seals, interior. The coolers were warm to the touch, thermometers blinking like dying stars. We logged it, batch numbers, expiration dates, prices. The manager tried a bluff. Storage fees due before release. Alvarez didn't look up. Statute requires posted rates, none posted, and you failed to file impound with the county within 2 hours, your fee schedule is void. The deputy's eyebrow twitched. The manager's keys rattled louder. The president rolled up, tires spitting gravel. She climbed out, already talking. You can't set that thing back in our community, she said. That's not what this order is. Alvarez didn't turn. This order compels return. Your jurisdiction ends at the fence. If you want to litigate parking, do it legally, not by theft. She took a step closer to the deputy, voice low. He lifted a hand like a barrier. Ma'am. Back up. The yard went very quiet. We cut the tarp. Diesel systems came live with a soft whine. The coach's console lit like a cockpit returning from blackout. My hands shook on the wheel, not fear, re-entry. I breathed once, twice. Turned the key, the engine caught, a deep, relieved grind. Marines lined the lane like runway lights. The winch sang reversing notes, softer now, almost human. The coach slid off the bed and touched asphalt like a returning ship touching home water. The manager thrust a clipboard at me. Sign release. I read the form. It tried to waive claims. I looked at the deputy, then at the manager. I'll sign that I received my property under court order and reserve all rights for damages, I said. I wrote it on the line in thick block letters a drill instructor would respect. He grimaced. Fine. Alvarez took one last pass with his camera. Everything you didn't post, he said, we recorded. Deleting now is spoliation. You understand? The manager nodded without moving his head. We rolled out slow, the coach following the cruiser like a veteran in a parade who doesn't want flags, just a clear path. The president shouted something about special meetings and retroactive votes. I didn't answer. The law had already answered for me in a judge's ink. On the street, neighbors stood on porches holding mugs and phones, faces tight then loosening as the coach cleared the gate. The single mom across the way lifted a hand to her heart like she'd kept it there all night. I parked in my driveway for 30 seconds. Long enough to swap coolers for new ones waiting in my kitchen, long enough to move med kits and the portable ECG from the house back to the coach. Then I pulled out again, ignoring the president's voice buzzing like a trapped fly. I wasn't arguing. I had a clinic to set up and a fraud machine to unwind. The engine hummed, steady as a promise. This wasn't over. It had just become official. I parked the coach for 30 seconds, swapped in fresh coolers, and left the engine humming like a heartbeat I refused to lose. Clinic in 3 hours. Fraud hunt now. My kitchen became a command post. Laptop, legal pad, black coffee strong enough to float a coin. I pulled a thumb drive from a ceramic bowl where I'd hidden it months ago. A gift from a former HOA secretary who'd whispered, in case you ever need it. I needed it. Click. A QuickBooks export opened into rows and columns that felt like a map of a minefield. HOA assessments in neat monthly pulses. Vendor payments bleeding out. Caldwell recovery appeared again and again, wrapped in notes like landscape overflow, seasonal cleanup, gate maintenance. The amounts lined up with storage numbers I'd seen at the yard down to the dollar. Kickbacks disguised as weeds. I traced payments to a secondary LLC. The name looked innocuous until I cross-checked registrations and saw the president's maiden name in the filing history. My jaw locked. Residents paid dues to mow park strips. The money bought someone a personal toy catalog. I screenshotted everything, circled dates, linked transfers. Paper trails don't lie, they just hide. Phone on speaker. Alvarez steady. We feed this to 3 places, he said. Fidelity bond carrier, attorney general, county fraud. Keep the chains separate and moving in parallel. I assembled a packet that would make an auditor sigh and a prosecutor sit up. Ledger excerpts, bank routings, the forged vote, the illegal tow, the ADA disruption to the clinic. Evidence of harm, evidence of intent, not just sloppiness. A system. The bond carrier's hotline put me with a man whose voice revealed nothing. I laid it out. He asked 3 questions. Is the treasurer related to the recovery yard? Yes. Do you have proof that the board bypassed recorded amendments? Yes. Is resident money used to reimburse unapproved vendors? Yes. His pen clicked once. If verified, the bond triggers and we subrogate against personal assets used in the fraud. Translation. The insurer pays victims, then legally hunts the wrongdoer's property to recover. I thanked him, hung up, and felt a pressure drop I could almost hear. I ran a title check on the president's house. White columns, circular drive. A HELOC stretched to snapping. If the bond hit and the AG moved, that mansion wasn't a castle. It was collateral with a front porch. I filed an emergency motion for a preservation order. Stop shredders, stop deletes, stop last-minute property transfers. Judges don't love HOA soap operas, they do love paper. Clinic prep ticked. I checked the coach batteries. Solid. I checked the meds. Stable in the replacement coolers. My phone buzzed with a text from the single mom across the street. Need help later? I can volunteer. I typed back a thank you without letting the anger in my chest sour it. People like her fund the soul of a neighborhood. People like the president siphon it. I slid documents into labeled folders. Service, bond, AG, DMV, fraud. Then I zipped them into a go bag that had seen sand and rain and the wrong end of a flight line. Marine habit, pack like you'll be chased. I stood in the doorway and scanned the living room, the flag in its shadow box, the framed photo of a clinic from last year where a tough old gunny smiled like a kid after we fixed his pain. That's why the Fury didn't get to be in charge. Law did. I rolled to the clinic site and set up cots while calls flew. The deputy confirmed our civil standby for the afternoon. The process server texted, documents printed on your signal. Alvarez pinged. AG intake received. County fraud interviews queued. Bond adjuster meeting 7 a.m. tomorrow. Good. Machinery moving. I pressed my palm to the coach, still warm from the fight, and made myself a promise said in a whisper. We won't just get even, we'll get clean. At 9 sharp, the first Marine walked in with his daughter. She clung to his sleeve. He pretended not to limp. We checked him in, checked his pain, checked the ECG, worked the problem. The clinic mattered more than any vendetta. But make no mistake, once the last patient left, the rest of my day was war. Paper, service, spoliation notices. And if the bond carrier did what I thought they would, the road from my driveway led straight to her portico. By noon, I'd seen 8 patients. We ran tight and fast, every minute squeezed for usefulness. Between vitals, I moved the chessboard. The deputy confirmed schedule, civil standby at the president's address. The process server met us on the corner, documents sealed, camera ready. We rolled as a convoy of ordinary cars and 1 deputy cruiser. My Marine brothers followed in separate vehicles, not as a show of force, but as licensed recovery operators on standby, paperwork ready, body cams charged, protocols drilled. The cul-de-sac held its breath when we turned in, sprinklers hissed, a lab barked and was shushed. The president stepped out with a false calm that cracked around the eyes. She started talking before we parked. You're trespassing in a private community. The deputy held up the writ like a crossing guard stopping a truck. Civil standby, service of process. The words were simple. The weight wasn't. Neighbors gathered in a loose ring. Joggers slowed to a shuffle. Phones rose. The process server approached the portico like a man delivering mail to a sleeping dragon. He announced her name, the case, the documents. Civil fraud complaint, spoliation notice, deposition subpoena. She shook her head. I don't accept. He clipped the packet to her gate and read from the statute that made refusal irrelevant. Service completed. The ring of neighbors tightened. Alvarez stepped forward, voice even. We request immediate preservation of HOA records under court order. Shredders, cloud deletions, off-site removals, all prohibited. Violations will be reported to the court. The president tried to pivot to sympathy. This is a misunderstanding, she said, turning toward the cluster of strollers and lawn chairs like she could harvest empathy. I held up a ledger page, names obscured, line items visible. Residents paid for landscaping. Money went to a towing yard run by the treasurer's family. The rest went into a private LLC. Murmurs turned into a low, angry tide. Then it hit a small, necessary mercy. The single mom from my street stepped out from behind the crowd and spoke without shaking. You towed his clinic, she said. You did it knowing he helps us. Silence followed, heavy as a threat. The president blinked, her jaw worked. She looked to the deputy for rescue that wasn't coming. The deputy cleared his throat. Ma'am, you've been served. You are also notified of a records preservation order. Any violation will be recorded and brought to the judge. He pointed to the posted notice we affixed to the HOA office door minutes earlier. Community meeting procedures are under review. Any emergency session without proper notice will trigger sanctions. She took a step back like the porch had moved. I spoke low, for the ring, not for her. This isn't about rules you like or don't like. It's about the difference between governance and grift. A retired trucker in a faded cap nodded. The nurse from 2 doors over crossed her arms like she was done being polite. We didn't gloat. We didn't jeer. We documented. The process server logged time stamps. Alvarez photographed the posted notices. The deputy body cam caught the whole exchange. Then I did something I had planned and dreaded. I asked the deputy to witness my delivery of a demand for immediate inspection of HOA financials under our state statute. She refused. We recorded the refusal. That matters later. On the way back to the clinic, the convoy felt lighter and sharper at the same time. The bond carrier had scheduled us for morning. County fraud wanted statements. The AG's intake stamped our complaint receipt. My phone buzzed with a text from the former secretary. I'm ready to testify. Good. Courage multiplies once someone goes first. Back at the community room, a little boy gave me a fist bump so serious it made my throat close. We finished the clinic on time. The last patient left smiling like he'd put down a bag he carried for years. I packed the ECG into the coach, locked cabinets, and glanced at the clock. The 24-hour mark sunrise to sunrise was almost up. We weren't finished. We were on schedule. I stood outside the door as dusk cooled the air. I told myself again the rule that kept me from the edge. Calculated revenge, not rage. Beside that, a stricter rule. Law over chaos. Tomorrow morning, the bond carrier would open a folder and a door. If the totals matched the ledger, we weren't just serving papers. We'd be securing assets lawfully before they vanished into smoke. And that sound you hear when the game flips, it's a lock turning. Night fell. A push notification pinged neighbors about an emergency HOA meeting. No 48-hour notice. No agenda. A trap disguised as urgency. I texted Alvarez. We record, we don't disrupt. He replied with a checkmark and a line of statute numbers like ammunition laid out on a bench. The clubhouse was a box of stale air and folding chairs. The board sat at a plastic table under fluorescent hum, trying to look official with stacks of paper that didn't add up. The president opened her mouth like a curtain going up. This board will ratify enforcement measures to maintain community standards. Alvarez clicked on a visible recorder. I stood, calm, roll call, quorum proof, posted agenda, 3 demands, 3 failures. She waved it away. We have broad discretion. I pointed at the corkboard where the bylaws hung like a photocopy of a photocopy. No state amendment stamp. Your last update was never recorded. You can't ratify illegal acts after the fact. The treasurer's eyes darted to the exit again. The retired trucker muttered counterfeit like a gavel drop. Then the door opened and the former secretary walked in with a manila envelope hugged to her chest like a life preserver. She looked at me, then at the room, and chose. I'm done, she said, voice shaking in a way that made it stronger. She handed me the envelope. Emails spilled out, subject lines like incentive to enforce, friendly list, who to ignore. One line froze the room. For every impound, Caldwell will split storage with us under landscaping account. Us, not the community, the conspirators. Alvarez moved like a medic in a firefight, collected, labeled, date-stamped. These exhibits are now preserved, he said, eyes on the board. Any deletion is spoliation, any destruction is obstruction. The president slammed a plastic gavel so hard the head flew off, bounced once, and rolled under a chair. The symbolism wasn't subtle. The room didn't laugh. It made a sound I'd heard on airfields when engines wind down, relief mixed with disbelief. I asked simple questions, each one a step onto firmer ground. Where is the vendor contract for Caldwell Recovery? Silence. Who approved payments to an LLC connected to board members? Silence. Who signed the vote of a dead neighbor? A cough, a chair scrape, the sound of power shedding skin. Neighbors spoke up, not loud, clear. The single mom asked about her overdue work order. The nurse asked why the pool budget doubled while the first aid station sat empty. The trucker asked why he'd been fined for a flag bracket while the president's buddy built a fence 2 feet too high. The pattern came into focus for everyone at once. Selective compliance isn't a mistake. It's a racket. The president tried to adjourn. Alvarez stepped between the idea and the door. You can walk, he said, but this record walks with you. We'll file a motion to void any action taken tonight. He turned to the room. I recommend an interim residence committee to begin documentation and prepare for a special election per statute. Heads nodded. Pens came out. The former secretary cried so quietly it broke me in places I didn't know were still soft. I looked at the clock and felt the night tighten around a hinge. In the morning, the bond carrier would open our packet. If they moved, they would retain a recovery firm to secure assets tied to fraudulent transactions, vehicles, equipment, and anything else purchased through the slush pipeline. I texted my brothers, stand by, clean uniforms, body cams charged, we do this by the book. On the way out, the president hissed in the doorway, you think you can humiliate me? I didn't bite. You did this, I said. We turned on the lights. Outside, the parking lot smelled like wet concrete and cut grass. The neighborhood wasn't safe yet, but for the first time all week it felt awake. 7 a.m. A strip mall conference room that smelled like carpet glue and stale hope. The bond adjuster sat across from us with a legal pad and a face you couldn't read with a flashlight. Alvarez laid the packet on the table. I watched the adjuster's pen. When professionals see real fraud, their handwriting changes speed. His did. We walked him through it like a route clearance. Ledger lines, transfers labeled as landscaping that matched towing invoices. The yard owned by the treasurer's family, the unrecorded amendments, the forged vote with a dead neighbor's name, the illegal impound that disrupted a veteran clinic and spoiled meds. Not one accusation without a receipt. Not one conclusion without a statute. He nodded once. If verified, this triggers coverage. We will indemnify harmed residents and pursue subrogation against responsible parties. He slid a form across the table. Signed to authorize communication with law enforcement and your counsel. I signed like my pen weighed a pound. He made one call that changed the day. Counsel, he said into the phone, prepare to secure identified assets purchased with misappropriated funds. Draft for a protective levy pending final judgment. He listened, said, yes, veteran-owned recovery firm preferred, then hung up. Outside, my phone buzzed. County fraud set interviews. The AG's office sent a case number with an investigator's name attached. DMV enforcement emailed photos of the yard's missing posted rates and a note that an on-site inspection was imminent. Machinery, not flashy, relentless. At noon, we met the deputy to pre-brief. He reviewed the writ template being finalized by the bond carrier's counsel. 2 SUVs titled to the Shell LLC, a jet ski trailer, a commercial generator, and a storage unit full of luxury fixtures purchased on HOA cards. The deputy pointed a finger at me. No theatrics, no speeches, you're a witness and a beneficiary, not an actor. Understood, I said, he half smiled. I figured. Neighbors watched from porches as marked trucks idled near the cul-de-sac entrance, clean rigs, logos visible, nothing that looked like a raid. Body cams on, contracts printed, chain binders neatly coiled like quiet snakes. The president came out trying for casual, failing. She called 3 people, voice shredding. Then her bank called her back. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the color leave her face in a single stroke. The freeze had landed on HOA accounts pending investigation. Her vendors stopped taking calls. Bond counsel arrived with a case file thicker than a phone book. He greeted the deputy like a man who'd done this before breakfast on Tuesdays. He served the writ. He read out the listed assets. We are securing property acquired through misappropriated association funds under the bonded party's control, he said, tone mild, words heavy. The president sputtered. You can't touch my home. Counsel looked at the page. We are not touching your homestead today. We are securing LLC property. If totals exceed bond limits, we will petition for a protective levy on the residents to prevent asset flight pending judgment. She laughed once, a brittle sound, and then didn't. The veteran recovery team moved with the grace of people who know how to lift weight and carry responsibility. They documented each item, photographed VINs, logged conditions. The deputy narrated for the camera like a human chain of custody. I stood back, hands at my sides, throat tight. This wasn't revenge porn, this was surgery. Neighbors didn't cheer. They didn't need to. They asked questions in low voices. What happens next? Do our dues get returned? Can we vote them out? Alvarez answered. Audit, restitution, special election. A path forward that felt like a road after a storm, branches everywhere, but you can see the line. As the first SUV rolled up the ramp, the single mom touched my sleeve. Does this fix it? I swallowed. It starts it. Across the street, the nurse wiped her eyes and then squared her shoulders like she had a shift to work and a world to help. We finished the inventory, countersigned every line. The team secured the loads without a scratch to anything not on the list. When the rigs pulled away, the cul-de-sac sounded different, not quiet, intentional. The president stood alone on her portico, phone dead in her hand, eyes unfocused. I didn't feel triumph. I felt something harder to explain. We had put weight on the right side of the scale and watched it move. Counsel closed his briefcase. Emergency hearing in the morning on the protective levy, he said. If the totals hold, we'll ask to secure the residence. The deputy nodded, checked his watch, and told us to clear the street. We did. The clock hadn't stopped, it had changed hands, and at the next sunrise the gavel wouldn't just knock, it would land. Morning broke cold and clear, the kind of light that makes edges honest. I parked halfway down the block so the cul-de-sac could breathe. The deputy rolled slow, strobes muted. Bond counsel stepped out with a case file that looked heavier than it should. The veteran recovery team idled 2 streets over, not hiding, just not crowding the scene. We were here for paper. Paper moves mountains. Neighbors were already on porches. Coffee steam, bare feet on concrete, no small talk. Everyone knew the beat. The process servers fanned out like chess pieces. One peeled toward the HOA office to post the records preservation order, bold print, clear statute, timestamp. Another cut across a lawn toward a board member who had smiled at me last summer and signed a dead neighbor's name this winter. The last server faced the white columns. I walked beside the deputy. He reminded me, low voice, that this wasn't a show. You don't address her, he said. You address the record. I nodded. The front door opened. She stepped out, jaw set, eyes bright with sleep and fury. No performance now. Raw, exposed nerve. The server announced her name, the case numbers, the nature of the documents. Civil fraud complaint, spoliation notice, deposition subpoena. She shook her head. I don't accept. He clipped the packet to her gate, read the statute that made refusal irrelevant, and logged the minute. Service complete. No drama. All wait. Bond counsel read the list of assets tied to the Shell LLC and the fraudulent vendor pipeline. Not the house, not yet, 2 subs, a jet ski trailer, the generator that powered parties while pool drains went unrepaired. We'll be back with a writ, he said, voice like a sealed envelope. Today we notice. This afternoon we execute. She tried to pivot to sympathy, eyes tying knots. I've worked for this community for years, she said to the ring of phones and folded arms. People just don't understand the pressure. I lifted a ledger page without names, just numbers. Pressure doesn't explain kickbacks, I said, not to her, to the street. Pressure doesn't explain forged votes. Pressure doesn't break into a veteran clinic. The trucker in the faded cap made a sound that wasn't a word. The nurse's jaw set like a door closing. The deputy fixed the preservation order to the iron post. He looked at her and spoke for the camera. Ma'am, the court expects full compliance. Any deletion, destruction, or removal of records will be addressed immediately. A curtain twitched across the street. Kids watched between slats. You can't teach integrity in a lecture. You teach it with consequences. We cleared the walkway. The process servers moved to their cars, texted confirmations, and drove off to the next doors. I stayed until the deputy finished his notes. 2 p.m., he said to counsel. We'll reconvene with the writ. Counsel nodded. The plan had gears now. You could hear the teeth catch. On the drive back to my place, I called Alvarez. He was 3 steps ahead. County fraud wants you at 2:30, he said. AG Investigator 4, bring the QuickBooks exports and the email set. He paused. We're within inches of an emergency protective levy on the residence. Totals exceeded the bond. I didn't smile, I didn't gloat. I checked my mirrors, checked my pulse, checked the time. Then I said what needed saying. We do this without a scratch to anything that isn't on the list. Law over chaos. He said good. He said keep recording. He said see you there. At noon, I stood in my kitchen, put my hand on the coach keys and felt the hum under my palm. We were past threat and into execution. Past speeches and into signatures. When I stepped back out, neighbors looked at me like I carried both a torch and a fire extinguisher. Maybe I did. Maybe that's what this job is. Light the right things, put out the rest, leave a path anyone can walk after you. 2 p.m. sharp. The sun sat high and merciless. The deputy returned with another cruiser. Bond counsel unfolded a fresh court-stamped writ like a flag. He read every line aloud because words matter when boots touch thresholds. Writ of possession for property purchased with misappropriated association funds held by the bonded parties LLC. He listed the assets. He named the addresses. He closed the file and looked at the deputy. Shall we? We shall. The veteran recovery team rolled in, marked trucks, straps coiled, body cams on, checklists scuffed from use. The team lead nodded to the deputy, then to me, then to the street. Respect in all directions. We approached the portico. The door opened fast and hard. She stood there trembling, anger fighting gravity. You can't take my property, she said. Counsel didn't blink. The court has determined these assets belong to the LLC tied to fraudulent transactions, not to you personally. We will inventory, secure, and transport. You will receive a receipt for every item. Word by word, nail by nail. Keys turned slow. Garages opened like mouths. The SUVs waited under soft light and the smell of wax. The trailer shone with money that should have patched roofs and fixed sidewalks. The generator sat heavy on its dolly like it knew the weight of every hour it blasted into the night while residents fought over fines. The team split. 2 documented, 2 loaded. 1 read serials to the deputy who repeated them for the camera. There's a rhythm to lawful repossession that feels like a march measured, unified final. She tried to block the ramp. The deputy stepped in. Back, please. His tone carried a decade of de-escalations. She moved. The team lead asked permission to remove framed HOA parking placards from the SUV's rear window before transport. She nodded, dazed. Even in this, decency held the line. Neighbors didn't cheer. They steadied each other. Someone brought water bottles and set them on the curb like offerings to sanity. The single mom squeezed my arm and whispered, I thought no one could stop them. You did, I whispered back. You spoke up, she shook her head. You wrote it down. Both things were true. Courage without a record is a spark in rain. A record without courage is a file in a drawer. Together they burn clean. As the first SUV climbed the ramp, counsel served one more notice. Intent to seek a protective levy on the residents at tomorrow's hearing. She barked a laugh that had no air behind it. You're bluffing. He didn't argue. He handed her the paper and logged the minute. The deputy checked his watch, rotated, and cleared the lane for the second load. The generator thumped into place like a heart moved from a body that never owned it. Then the phone call hit. Not mine, hers, her bank. The freeze had expanded from HOA accounts to the LLC. Vendors texted me screenshots of declined charges and emails that said pending investigation. She went very still. For the first time I saw it land, not the loss of toys but the arrival of a mirror. This wasn't a feud, it was a reckoning. We finished the inventory, the team signed, counsel signed, the deputy signed, I witnessed, no speeches. No victory lap. The trucks purred away, weight shifting, chains singing. The cul-de-sac exhaled like a field after lightning. I turned to the nurse and said we'd meet later to plan an interim health station at the clubhouse with donated gear. She nodded, eyes bright, chin set. People move toward purpose when fear loses its microphone. Alvarez called as I walked to my truck. Emergency hearing is on the docket at 9, he said. Judge will hear totals, bond cap, and fraud evidence. If we land the levy, it's to prevent asset flight pending judgment. No one is homeless today. No one is humiliated for sport. We secure, we preserve, we rebuild. I looked back at the white columns. Copy, I said, calculated, not cruel. He said that's exactly why it's working. The courthouse smelled like toner and coffee and old carpet, a perfume of decisions and delays. We didn't get the latter. The judge opened with a look that said she had read every line. Bond counsel summarized, illegal impound, forged votes, unrecorded amendments. County fraud presented bank traces, assessments to vendor to shell LLC to personal accounts. The AG investigator spoke last, leaning on words like scheme, pattern, intent. Then they slid the total across the rail. It outstripped the bond by a margin you could measure in sidewalks, pool filters, roof patches. The judge capped her pen and looked at the defense table. Silence. She signed the order for a protective levy on the residents, narrow, targeted, designed to prevent asset flight. This preserves the status quo, she said. Final judgment will decide ownership. Today we secure. We left the stamp behind and carried oxygen out the door. Bond counsel called the veteran recovery team. The deputy met us at the block again, posture steady, body cam live. The locksmith stepped from a van with a suitcase of quiet tools. We approached the portico with forms, camera, and a decibel of respect that never dropped. She opened before we knocked. No makeup, no armor, she didn't yell. Is there a way to undo this? She asked, eyes searching faces like doors. Counsel didn't soften the facts. Cooperate fully, produce records, return funds, resign. Help repair the community you damaged. He didn't promise mercy. He pointed down a path that didn't end in ruin if she started walking. We inventoried fixtures identified in the order. The imported outdoor kitchen tied to landscaping overflows. The designer pergola booked through the Shell LLC. The built-in generator marked with the HOA card last fall. Not removal. Not today. Just locks changed, serials recorded, access controlled. A levy isn't a storming, it's a pause button with a badge. Neighbors gathered again, but the energy shifted. Less sharp, more sober. The retired trucker raised his hand like school. We gonna have a vote? He asked. Alvarez nodded. Interim committee forms today, special election in 30 days per statute, independent audit before that. The nurse asked if we could move the clinic to the clubhouse for a while. I said yes. The single mom offered to coordinate volunteers. A teenager asked if he could design the flyers. We were building in the gaps even as we sealed the breaks. The deputy posted the levy notice next to the preservation order. 2 sheets of paper that meant the difference between rumor and reality. Counsel photographed, sent, and filed. The locksmith handed over fresh keys with tags like dog tags, clear, numbered, accountable. We signed for them. She watched, eyes wet, hands empty. I didn't feel triumph. I felt a bone-deep fatigue that tastes like duty after a long march. When the trucks left, no one clapped. People drifted back to lawns and screens and lives. I stayed. The flag on her porch had frayed in the wind. I asked the deputy if I could replace it. He nodded. I brought one from my truck, folded right, bright, and clean. I swapped it with gloved hands. She stood there, silent. I looked at her, not through her. This isn't about destroying you, I said. It's about stopping the damage. She gave the smallest nod. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was the first true thing she'd done all year. Evening brought emails. AG escalated. County fraud scheduled depositions. The bond carrier processed indemnity for residents who ate bogus fines. The former secretary's statement landed with timestamps that nailed sequence to the floor. I lay in bed and listened to the house settle. The coach ticked in the driveway like a machine cooling after a run. Tomorrow we'd open the clinic at the clubhouse with donated gear. Tomorrow we'd post the agenda for the special election. Tomorrow there'd still be trouble. But tonight the wind that had been in our faces all week shifted at our backs. We opened the clinic at dusk in the community room, folding tables, clean linens. New coolers paid for by donations that appeared in my inbox like small lights. The nurse charted, the trucker carried cases. The single mom ran check-in with a system that would shame a hospital. The first patient sat. A Marine with hands like shovels who couldn't sleep through his pain. We adjusted meds, coach stretches, checked his ECG. He cried once quick and looked away. I pretended not to see and handed him a schedule for follow-ups instead. Pride deserves an exit lane. Outside, the levee notice fluttered on the portico next to a fresh flag. Inside, neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder in the quiet solidarity that only comes after a neighborhood looks into its own mirror and doesn't look away. Alvarez briefed the interim committee in a side nook. Audit scope records request letter to residents. Bond counsel promised restitution where the math allowed and recovery where it didn't. The AG investigator shook hands without smiling. Gratitude here wasn't soft. It was shaped like work. I walked the hall alone for a minute because leaders need corners. My hands trembled and then stilled. The week ran back through my head in flashes, chains at sunrise, a forged signature under fluorescent hum, a fence sliding open, a winch singing backward like a song in reverse, a writ unfolding in clean light, keys, locks, paper, people. I stepped outside and found her on the steps, sitting small on stone that used to feel like a throne. She stared at the levee notice. I told myself it was for the community, she said, voice like cardboard. I said the quiet part out loud in my head and still pretended I was helping. I didn't make a speech. You can still help, I said. Tell the whole truth, don't defend, repair. She nodded once. Maybe she would, maybe she wouldn't, that's not on me. We ended the clinic late. The line didn't thin, it softened. People left with instructions and hope that felt earned, not advertised. As I locked the coach, the teenager who designed the flyers jogged up, breathless and proud. Videos at 100,000, he said, showing me a phone screen full of comments. Neighbors from other towns, veterans from other states, people who recognized a pattern and needed proof it could break. I told him good work. I told him to get sleep. He laughed like he didn't know how. Under the flag, I spoke to the camera because some stories need a line drawn at the end. This isn't a victory lap, I said. It's a map. If someone takes what's yours with a smile and a title, don't bring a scream. Bring the law document. File, serve, stand, win clean so the win lasts. I looked at the portico, then at the community room where voices hummed like a hive that had chosen a direction. We didn't burn down a house. We rebuilt a neighborhood. I turned off the coach lights. The street went quiet enough to hear sprinklers tick and a dog collar jingle. In my chest, something unclenched that had been tight since sunrise on day one, not all the way, enough. I thought of the little girl who waved at the clinic door, of the Marine who finally slept, of the neighbors who voted with their feet when fear ran out of places to hide. If you made it here, you felt it too. The shock, the injustice, the stakes, the mystery. You watched a system break and a community repair it with paper and backbone. Do me a favor. Drop a good comment that says what part hit you hardest and tell me where you're watching from. That tells the algorithm this story mattered, and it tells scammers everywhere that people are paying attention. Like the video if you believe law beats chaos. Share it if your neighborhood needs a spine. And subscribe if you want more fights won the right way, clean, public, permanent.